Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Marketing Scientists. Today, I'll be speaking with Ashley Faus, who leads Lifecycle Marketing at Atlassian. Three things that I think you'll learn from this episode: the art of storytelling and persuasive communication, how Ashley thinks about measuring the impact of her lifecycle team's work, especially going into 2025 planning, and last but definitely not the least, how lifecycle is embedded in everything that Atlassian does. So let's get into it. Ashley, thank you for joining us. This is going to be so awesome. I have followed you on LinkedIn for a while. You've had an amazing career, especially your role at Atlassian over the last several years. And I have lots of questions. So thank you for joining. And I'm going to jump straight in. You worked at Duarte Inc., which I believe is the group of people who are doing all the amazing presentations. Am I right? Or did I get that completely wrong?
They are. So yes, I worked at Duarte for about 4 years prior to coming to Atlassian. It was awesome. And I hesitate to call them presentation specialists because what they do is beyond presentations. Like, they're not playing the same game as the rest of us. I actually just posted, funny enough, about this on LinkedIn, building some slides for a presentation. And I was like, listen, unless you're Duarte, you maybe don't need to go so far with your animations and trying to be fancy because stuff breaks and all of that. So Duarte, in addition to being excellent at slides, they are also phenomenal at crafting stories, really helping craft persuasive communications. And I think that's the other big thing that I learned during my time there is it's not just about telling a good story, it's about using story to help people take action, which is different, right? And as a marketer, that is something that I take to heart because getting attention is not the goal. Telling a great story is not the goal. It's that action, that next action that someone takes. That's really the goal from a marketing standpoint. So yeah, happy to chat about Duarte as well.
What a beautiful thought to start this from, right? Because if we're talking about what is the role of marketing, sales, all of us who are trying to get people to do something is to take action. So maybe, let's start with that. If you had to, this is a hard question, if you had to boil everything that you learned at Duarte into what, maybe Pranav should do at Paramark in terms of getting people to take action, what would you say that is?
So I'll actually reframe the question a little bit because it's less
Sure.
about what I learned at Duarte and more about kind of my general philosophies on marketing, which obviously I brought to my time at Duarte and complemented very nicely to their approach to persuasive communication. So first, ultimately, marketing and sales are to grow the business profitably. And whether you are focused on talent brand, whether you're focused on brand, demand, whether you are in sales where you're closing near-term revenue, ultimately for the business to grow, you have to be looking at that from a practical perspective. So that's one from like a business standpoint. Another piece of this, and I know it sounds funny as a marketer given what I just said, I actually never want to sell anything to anybody. Because if I'm trying to convince you that you need whatever it is that I have, it's probably not going to go well for both of us, right? So instead, I think marketers should be matching problems with solutions for humans. And we get all caught up in the technology and, we've got to optimize this. We've got to roll out this system. We've got to measure every little thing, right? That's not what marketers do. We get so caught up with, I have to launch this specific product. I have to launch this specific feature. I have to tell people this specific thing on social media. Again, that's not what marketers do. Ultimately, we need to match problems and solutions for humans. So I'll say that as kind of just the groundwork. And obviously that does dovetail very nicely with the storytelling approach to persuasive communications at Duarte. And then also with Atlassian, the way that we unite both the practices across people and tools. So you'll never hear us just saying that a tool will solve your problem. We always talk about the interaction of the people, the process, and the practices, both to use those tools, to buy those tools, to implement those tools, and then obviously to work with each other.
That's that's a really refreshing thing to hear in tech, right? Because a lot of times you hear brands talking about this amazing tool is going to change everything, right? $20 a month and it's going to change your life. And a lot of times, right, we're an early stage company, we're, VC backed, and we'll continue to be on that train, right? And you will hear from VCs where, well, like, can you automate that? And like, can you remove the human being? And like, do you really need to have people in that position? And we forget about this interplay between the people and the tools and the processes. I think you used a different word, but and it's really refreshing to hear that at Atlassian. How does that show up in your marketing? How does that like show up in your, and you lead lifecycle marketing across the board. So how do you sort of infuse that in your emails? Or actually, you know what? Tell me about lifecycle marketing. What does that mean to you?
Lifecycle marketing, and I get this question a lot. They're like, what does your title mean? They'll ask, like, why does it say portfolio? And I'm like, well, that basically just means that I go across all of our portfolio. It means that I'm not attached to a specific product. It means that my team helps support all of our portfolio areas and then also helps connect those dots across the portfolio. So that's the first thing. The second thing, from a lifecycle perspective, one other thing too that I guess I should say, this is less of like my overall philosophy of practicing marketing, but a framework that I have introduced and kind of a mindset that I've adopted over the last several years. I actually eschew the funnel as a forward-looking strategy tool. Like, we all know that nobody buys in this neat, linear awareness, consideration, purchase, decision,
I will
right?
become a lead before an
Yeah,
opportunity,
like
before buying.
people don't do that in a nice linear way, right? Particularly in SaaS, where we have to keep winning and re-winning the hearts, minds, and wallets of our audience. There's also this retention, cross-sell, expansion, upsell piece of that traditional funnel. And that is basically where we get the looping decision journey that then somehow drops you back, apparently right back into the awareness phase, which again makes zero sense if you already have a relationship and an experience with the brand and their products. So from a life cycle perspective, that actually looks at the full life cycle of that customer, all the way from when they first start learning about the problem, when they first start realizing that they might have a problem and that however they're solving it, or if they're not solving it, it's not working, all the way to now we have a solution, which does include tools, processes, and practices, right? It might include people in some cases where you need to hire someone or you need to work with an agency or a consultant. And then it does also include that post-purchase retention, cross-sell, upsell, advocacy, user. So again, customer success, documentation.
Mm.
These things don't just get thrown over the wall after you acquire the customer. And I think this is one area where if you go back to the 4 P's of marketing, the like fundamental stuff you learn in marketing 101 freshman year at university, it's product, price, place, and promotion. And too often marketers either pigeonhole themselves or get stuck in just the promotion, and they forget about the other 3 P's. And so when we think about, and again, coming at this from a SaaS lens and a product lens, that ability to actually continuously get value out of the product, how people are using it, what happens to them if they churn from the product, why are they churning, who are they churning to? They're, in theory, they're bought in on this problem. So if we're not the ones solving it, why not? How are they solving it now? That goes all the way back to that first P, where it's not just about, did I get them to use the product today? It's, have I empowered them to get continuous value so that they will continue becoming a customer and ultimately grow as a customer. So that's what lifecycle marketing is really about. It's not just thinking about that acquisition stage. It's thinking about what happens to these people once they get into the product, as they grow with us, and then as they potentially discover new problems and we potentially create new solutions. How do we match those on a continuous basis?
Okay, that's a really robust and thorough framework. Um, and the challenge that I have in my head is, right, I could ask this question to a head of product marketing or a head of growth marketing, and there'll be a lot of overlap between sort of how they answer that question, the four P's, the fact that growth is also sometimes responsible for then, bringing you back into the cross sell, upsell, and right. How do you think about sort of harmonizing across those different functions in a large organization?
To your point about it being a large organization, what I would say is that there is a difference between the roles and responsibilities of each team and the experience and the mindset that your customer has. Your customer should not experience those handoffs.
Right.
That is what we call shipping the org, right? Where if I
Yep.
say, okay, as a product marketer, my goal is to get you, to drive, again, Atlassian for most of its history has grown via product-led growth. So my goal as a product marketer is to get you to sign up and get you into, the free version of the product. Okay, growth. Now you're the ones that, need to get somebody to upgrade to the standard or the premium. Okay, life cycle. Now it's your job to get them to renew or to buy the next product. Like that might make sense from an organizational standpoint so that you don't have people doing duplicative or potentially competitive work against each other. But as the customer, you should
Mm.
not see any of that. You should
Hmm.
not have this sense that like, well, I guess I'm supposed to buy from Ashley and then I guess Pranav is going to implement my product and Ashley goes away. But then I guess when it comes time to renew, Ashley's going to ping me and ask me when I'm buying again.
Yeah.
That's awkward. Why can't I
Yeah.
just hang out with Ashley? Right. So I I think that a lot of that differentiation comes more from both a skills and a roles and responsibilities standpoint within the organization and should be less impactful to the
Mm.
customer journey because they shouldn't have to deal with keeping up with who does what within your organization. Like they've got their own problems to solve. They don't need to figure out how to deal with you and however you're organizing your team. I would also say it depends on the company maturity and the skill sets. So if you're a smaller company, product marketing might actually do a lot of this, and then they
Mm.
might partner more closely with what is traditionally considered an ops team that does things like, implementing the marketing automation system or handling building dashboards, cleaning data, self-serve, creating a self-serve experience for data. In other organizations, you might have more distinct splits between product marketing, which is more focused on looking at the problems that the market has, and then basically bringing those insights back in and saying, hey, product, this is what the market says they need. Here's why you should build it. And then once product builds it, going back out to the market and saying, you said you have this problem. Here's how we have solved it for you. Versus growth might be doing a bunch of experiments and thinking about, how do we change CTAs? When do we trigger this certain email or that certain email to upgrade? Like, what are the intent signals for potentially churning or upgrading that could live in growth or life cycles? So I don't think there is one right way to structure the organization. The thing that I do think is a hard rule is that the customer should not experience the friction of your roles and responsibilities in the organization.
That's I completely agree with that, everything that you've said. I think that the hard part about that conversation is, does the organization and everybody who's working on the customer journey have a unified view of that customer journey, right? And it's so dynamic, it's changing every week because you're changing the product every week, you're changing your marketing every week. How do you deal with the practical reality of that within marketing at Atlassian? Like, is there, the very naive example, do you have a board that like literally maps out all the customer journeys? Do you have like owners of certain parts of that customer journey who are keeping it updated? Like, what does that look like in practical realities?
We take a very collaborative approach to that. So we have basically kind of squads that do include product marketers, CLM folks, and then a variety of more tactical people across paid ads, the onboarding experience, what would
Hmm.
traditionally, and again, we can talk about whether or not what counts as a growth marketer, right? Like
Sure.
some people
Yeah.
consider that to be digital or performance marketing. Some people consider that to be closer to lifecycle marketing. Some people consider it to be their own thing. So basically the key is ongoing touch points in that squad. And so people within that squad do have that unified view of the journey, but then we each have our own distinct areas of roles and responsibilities. So we don't have one board to rule them all because there are multiple journeys, but the squads are the ones that tend to have that unified view.
That's wonderful. I had this idea a long time ago that, we're a 5-person company and we'll grow up and someday be a 500-person company. And I would want to have this, squad concept on the go-to-market side. I love it. It's like something that borrowed from product engineering and design, right? If they can all function that way, why can't go-to-market people? So I love to hear that. Is that really a named squad? Like, is that a thing within Atlassian, or is it sort of loosely organized?
We don't have it's not like a squad with a name where it's like, oh, we have the Jira squad or we have the Confluence squad, and those are completely separate people.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a mix of teams that go across multiple, and again, my team is a perfect example where I have folks on my team who are assigned to different parts of the portfolio, but then I have that holistic view from a strategy standpoint. Some of my peers also have a more holistic view of the entire portfolio, but then individuals on their team who are actually executing the work have more distinct touch points. So we've also called this on kind of the product and engineering side of the house, the triad, where it's got a product manager, an engineer, and a design, and again,
Right.
manager, team lead, right? The seniority varies depending on the size of the scope. So I would say it's more loosely defined, but if you were to say like, who's handling this? And if I say, oh, Pranav is doing it, you would immediately be like, oh, we need to bring Ashley in too. It's not just go talk to Pranav. Has Ashley been looped in on this? And like, if you see a certain kind of crew of folks
Mm.
either having a meeting or on a page, we collaborate often on Confluence. So if you start to see people and there's somebody who's missing, pretty quickly somebody else from that crew will say,
Nice.
hey, we need to bring in this other person. So again, we are a large organization. At this point, we've got
Yeah,
more
yeah,
than
yeah.
10,000 employees, right? So I may not know that like Pranav is the guy, but
Yeah,
somebody in my orbit knows that you're the guy that we need to bring in to make
that's
sure that we
awesome.
have covered this skill
Yeah.
set. So again, it's more kind of a skill set and roles and
It's an
responsibilities
organism.
than
Yeah,
it
it's an
is.
organism that has figured out the roots across all the different. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned Confluence. I'm a big fan. I tried to get every go-to-market team to use Confluence, and I've always failed.
Oh, I got so excited. I don't know if people can see. Like, no one's gonna see this on Spotify, but I'm like, huzzah, with my hands, and I was like, oh, I
No, no, no.
dropped my
Let
hands.
me let me explain. Let me explain. So to some success, right? So at Bill.com, I can say this, like we got the entire product marketing and customer marketing team to set up everything on Confluence. And I think it worked pretty well. Like we had our, mission, we had written up our charter, right? Like what do we do? What do we not do? We've tagged everybody, roles and responsibilities, links to all the documents. I was so proud of that Confluence because as you can recognize, right? If you're in a remote environment with many different sort of teams, it was a great tool to bring everyone together. Now, the challenge was marketers somehow, in my opinion, uh, perceived Confluence and Jira as a very technical tool, and I'm curious, as a lifecycle marketer, how have you come across that challenge? If you have in certain sectors, have you been able to cross the chasm into outside of product and engineering, and any tips and tricks? Sorry for the long question, for other marketers to make that transition.
Sure. So there's a lot there. You are not wrong that a lot of our tools are associated with more technical teams, originally software development teams, and then eventually more into IT teams. And so this is both a product and a marketing problem. Again, we go
Mm.
back to those 4 Ps. Product is in there. And from a product marketing standpoint, this is not just a messaging exercise. We cannot just go to the market and say, by the way, Jira is for marketers now. Cool. Does it have a calendar view, like literally an editorial calendar view from a content and campaign standpoint? No. Okay, then it's not a tool for marketers, right? So we went back, spoke to our audience, and said, hey, what do you need, marketers, to be able to use this tool for what you actually execute and the work that you do. Now, Jira does have a calendar view, for example, as a perfect example of this. So this idea that it's a marketing perception or a brand perception issue is only one part of the challenge. And I hear this on both sides, especially coming from that product-led growth history that we've had. This misnomer that we'll just make a great product and the product sells itself.
Right.
That is incorrect. That's not what product-led growth is. And then the flip side is, well, if the product is not selling itself and we know it's good, it must just be a marketing issue. It's just a brand issue. You guys just need to go and do a campaign to tell people that we're for marketing. That is also incorrect. If the product does not deliver that experience, marketing is writing checks that product can't cash. And that is a problem. So we have actually tried to address that from both the product side and the marketing side. We went in, we talked to our audience, both internally and externally, and asked them, what features do you need? What workflows do you need? What do you not need? This is another issue. So there are a number of very relevant tabs, security, code, CI/CD, deployment frequencies. There is a lot. In theory, none of those words mean anything to marketers. They mean something to me because I do developer marketing, right? I don't need those tabs in Jira. That clutters up my Jira instance. And so even something like that, where it's not just about adding functionality, it's about taking away the clutter that someone doesn't need so that it changes the perception. If I immediately get dropped into Jira and I see deployment frequency and CI/CD and code and connect your Bitbucket, what the heck is a Bitbucket? Right? Like, I don't know what that nonsense is as a marketer. I don't need that, right? Versus integrations, for example, with Figma, where we got more design files, integrations with Slack, for example. So that mindset shift is not just about a messaging mindset and a perception mindset, it's about the product. So yes, we have been able to cross that chasm, both from a product standpoint and from a messaging standpoint. I would say that that is an ongoing journey for us. And we are still not perceived in that way as strong as we are on the developer and technical side, but we do find that people are starting to understand how we can help them, and we can expand within an organization. If you've got your technical teams using our tools and you're trying to go wall to wall with Atlassian, we now have a much more targeted offering to help you expand beyond. So it doesn't feel like, oh, the devs are forcing us to use their tool. It's, no, we now have the ability to collaborate better across the organization. So that's kind of the journey, both from a product and a marketing standpoint.
Totally. You said it perfectly. The devs are forcing me to use the tool. That's good listening. Okay, changing gears a little bit. So you went from leading corporate communications to lifecycle marketing, and you spent time in integrated media, integrated product marketing. Which one is your favorite?
Funny enough, I also get this question a lot. They're like, corporate communications, and I'm like, actually, when I originally got hired, that is, I would say, one of the weakest skills in my background. And the person who hired me actually needed more of a more holistic content strategist, and someone who could do social media, who could look across and make those connections more specifically into product marketing as well. So while I was hired to do that job, it became obvious very quickly that, and at the time, we had a more targeted approach from like a media relations standpoint as kind of our approach to comms at that point. So it became obvious very quickly that like, we should maybe have me doing something else. I joke that I stick my nose in other people's business, and that's how I've grown my career. Is if you end up coming to me for enough things, it's like, should you just be the person who does this? In terms of my favorite, I cannot pick a favorite because of what I just said. I like to stick my nose in other people's business. I am a generalist. I have done a variety of different types of marketing, as you mentioned, like kind of my path at Atlassian, and prior to that at smaller companies, having to be that generalist. So for me, I would say my favorite is doing a little bit from every box and connecting those dots horizontally. The big theme throughout my journey, particularly at Atlassian, is going horizontally. I have never been tied to a specific product at Atlassian, which is quite uncommon. Most of our folks are tied to products or portfolios. That's changing now. People are going more across solutions, but I'm kind of one of the oddballs that has never actually been attached to a single product at any point during my time at Atlassian. So I
Okay.
will again pivot the question to say my favorite is connecting all the dots across different things. And I'm generally pretty ambivalent about which portion of my skill
Yeah.
set I lean into to make that happen.
I think it's a great answer, right? So I hold this opinion that over the course of the last, 10, 20 years, a lot of tech has put all of these labels and marketing, right? There's product marketing and lifecycle marketing and growth marketing and performance marketing and brand marketing and customer marketing. Like, I can just keep going. And a lot of that has been done to solve organizational issues rather than a customer issue. And so your answer fits perfectly with my worldview that every marketer should be connecting the dots across all of this, the 4Ps, right? I did not study marketing, unfortunately. I wish I had. I think I would have liked it. So I had to educate myself. And, I'm always surprised when I hear marketers, even in this day and age, not knowing the 4Ps or how, Kotler has evolved that into the 7Cs, I think he calls it now, or the 7Ps or something like that. So love that. Okay, switching gears yet again. All this is fantastic. You've grown over the last 6-7 years into leadership roles. One of the aspects of growth in a large organization is being able to tie your work to the impact that you're having on the business. So maybe take an example of what you think you will do for 2025 planning. So instead of like looking at the past, I'm going to ask you a different question. How are you going to think about your team's impact in the business in 2025? How are you going to make the case? What is it going to look like? Any initial ideas or thoughts that you have on that?
So there's a couple things. I think particularly as you get more senior in your career and as you start managing a team, it's not just about the individual bottom line results. It's also about that organizational impact and scaling for the future. So my team is actually fairly new within the organization. And so as part of that, we've got some kind of storming within the
Mm.
team that we need to do. And then we also have some baselines and processes that we need to do to set us up for scale. So yes, we focus a lot on content and demand gen. So obviously we've got goals around pipeline, revenue, signups, et cetera. Those bottom line goals that I would say are pretty standard for most demand gen marketers.
Mhm.
And then obviously the whole life cycle element in terms of renewals and expansion and that sort of thing. What I think is unique as we are building is we're actually working through this concept of content velocity. And so it's not just more content, it is both a quality metric and a speed in the right direction metric. So velocity is actually speed in the right direction, not just pure
Mhm.
speed. So as we think about AI, incorporating that into our workflows, different tools that we can use to help scale, we could churn out a lot more output. That doesn't necessarily mean that output is driving our outcomes.
Mhm.
And so helping not just our team, but also from an organizational standpoint, as we think about growing and incorporating more AI tools both into our products and to our workflows and how AI is changing that landscape, thinking about that content velocity metric, getting a baseline, what's reasonable, how do you balance speed with quality? How do you make
Mm.
sure that you're actually getting that impact? What is that resonance with the audience? So again, that's great that a bunch of people entered the website or downloaded this ebook or looked at your LinkedIn post, but what action did they take?
Mm.
How do we know that message is actually resonating with those people? And again, very explicitly tying different actions to different types of content, and making sure that those intents are matched and that we're doing that at scale. So that's kind of what that content velocity metric is. And I'll say that one is new and I'm still figuring out exactly how to measure it because
Mm.
there's a qualitative piece to it and there's some long-term effects, right? There's the immediate effects that are easy to measure that are your traditional metrics
Yeah.
from a digital standpoint, but measuring those other pieces that indicate the process, overall tools, and constant, ways of working, that's the piece that's still evolving. So I'll throw
I
that
like
out
it.
there. Like I say, a lot of the metrics, it's like, yeah, this is
Yeah, yeah,
standard
yeah.
stuff that
No, that's
any
a good one.
marketer is
I want to workshop that with you because now I'm curious. Okay, so let's workshop this content velocity. I really like that idea. And one way that you could talk about it is the aggregate time being spent on your lifecycle marketing content, right? Like, and above a certain threshold, more than a minute. So it's not just clicked in, clicked out. There's an actual play, there's an actual scroll, what have you. That could work really well. And you could see if you're increasing the aggregate volume of consumption and how is that correlated with your business metrics, right? Have you all looked at anything like that or not really?
So I would say we're in the process of doing all of that correlation. I think we have the individual data points. I think it's trying to figure out exactly how all of those work together. The other piece of this that I'll say is I think there is an internal component to this as well. People are constantly asking for more content,
Yeah.
right? I need more white papers, more blogs, more infographics, more social posts. We need 10 social posts. And I'm kind of like, do you actually need 10 social posts? What are you going to do with those social posts, right? So this is another thing, another sales enablement. This is another perfect example. We need more pitch decks. We need more battle cards. We need more reference guides. Do you?
Yeah.
Because how many times have those assets been shared and not used? So I think this is another piece where you can almost say, okay, great. We're going to give you this barrage of content. Now we want to see how much of that content actually got used in a campaign. So there's the downstream aspect of did the audience like it? But there's the upstream aspect of did our internal users actually put this content into campaigns?
Mm.
Did those campaigns work? Was the format, the channel, the audience, the spend, and the outcomes, are those all aligned, right? Because a lot of teams are just looking at basically the spend, the ROI,
Yep.
basically. That's it.
Yep.
And no one's really looking at, okay, but could we
Right.
have tweaked it from a channel standpoint, a messaging standpoint, an audience standpoint, a formatting standpoint? Like there's all these other things that we could have tweaked it. You can't actually test those unless you
Yep.
have that holistic understanding and you have enough volume to test it, right? So once you get that volume piece down, you can say, okay, we're starting to see that these formats with this message, with this channel, with this audience tends to result in a better ROI. Now let's take a step back and start honing in on that quality piece and scale piece. If we want to go after a new audience, a new asset type, a new channel type, if we want to experiment with new partners from a spend perspective, if we're trying to do a new market segment such that we're starting from scratch, what are those processes that we've learned from where we had that volume play? And we've now been able to say, is it a volume thing? Is it a targeting thing? Right. So there's all these
Yep.
different levers. And again, this is why, especially, from a life cycle perspective and from a product marketing perspective, having access to all of those levers, because
Yeah.
you need to pull different levers at different times for different people, for different motions. So that's where I get excited, where I'm like, yeah, there's the content velocity metric, but it's all because of how you pull these different levers.
Totally.
That's what that metric is really helping you understand, is which levers to pull when and why. And then obviously where, the different
Yeah.
channels, assets, formats, et cetera, fit in.
Totally makes sense. And I didn't think enough about sort of the internal operational view, right? Which I can imagine the larger the organization, the more sort of stuck you can get in that, right? And if you can find the insights of like what's really being used by the frontline teams, it can be quite powerful. Okay, what's your take on this word has to come up on this podcast. What's your take on attribution?
Oh, attribution. Such a struggle, right? I actually love this spectrum. One of my former colleagues, who is actually now the CTO over at Benchling, came up with this,
Oh, nice.
or exposed me to this. So it kind of came from working with my engineering counterparts. But this spectrum of gut led to data driven. And so there's this idea, and marketing, I think the pendulum swings where we have to be so data driven. We have to measure every single thing at the most granularity. We have to slice and dice every single thing. And if you can't measure it, you can't do it, right? So that's one way that we have swung. In the past, I think as a kind of rebellion against this, because as we know, humans are fickle, it's really hard to connect both online and offline touch points in every single way, in a way that's easy to measure, right? Some people have swung back to this other like gut led. Measurement kills marketing. We don't need to measure. Be human. Just connect with the humans and you'll do the right thing, right? On one hand, sure. On the other hand, how are you connecting with the humans and how do you know it works? So he actually proposed this nice middle ground of data informed, where you are doing your best to collect those metrics, to measure, to unite them across that journey, but to understand that simply making every decision based on the exact granular measurement is not going to result in an action that makes sense for humans. And in his case, he was talking about this more from, code and performance and scaling and trade-offs, right? From a marketing perspective, it helps us move away from just doing the activities that are easy to measure at scale. It is a lot of the reason people do ads is because it's so easy to measure at scale. You put it out there, you spend a certain amount of money, you get a certain amount of clicks, you can measure cost per click very easily. In contrast, things like LinkedIn, especially from an employee advocacy standpoint, speaking at conferences, doing podcasts like this. What is the value of me being on this podcast for developer marketing at Atlassian, right? When I previously sat on our Agile and DevOps team. I speak to marketers about marketing things. What is the value of me talking about Atlassian on this podcast for the audience that I'm specifically supposed to market to? Never mind the fact that actually I gave a lovely use case and a great defense of using Atlassian products for marketers. Well, nope, that sits on the other team and you don't sit there, so therefore it's not useful, right? Like if our teams had that mindset, of course everyone would roll their eyes and be like, what? No, of course it has value, right?
Yeah.
But if we go only on the data-driven side, you would effectively look at that for my day job and say that this engagement is not useful. And again, how can you track it? Well, it doesn't go into the dashboard, so I don't know. I don't know. What? Clearly it has value, even though it doesn't neatly fit into the dashboard, right? So I try to take a holistic view. I do want to try to measure. I do want to look in the aggregate to understand how different channels, assets, audiences, et cetera, are converting, the lifetime value of the customer, et cetera. But this idea that if it is not easily tracked at scale means you should not do it, clearly that is not the right way to approach all of your marketing programs, strategy, and tactics.
Well, that's a wonderful bookend for this conversation. So thank you. And a little plug for anybody who's listening. If you're trying to figure out how to connect the dots between things that are easy to measure, hard to measure, offline, online, especially in all the privacy-centric sort of ways in which the world is moving, check out Paramount. But Ashley, one last question for you before we wrap up. So you mentioned AI. You mentioned using AI. Maybe just a quick 2 minutes on what are you most excited about as a marketer with all the AI stuff that's happening? Like any practical things that you have tried that have just worked wonders for you in the last couple of months?
I will note that I continue to be a skeptic.
Okay.
My old school skills are still very good compared to what AI can do. I recognize that is changing. So we've used it for some video editing. That has helped us immensely. I think it can be very useful we've used it to, pull out insights from customer calls, for example. So there are a lot of really practical, good use cases, but I have yet to find something that does wonders. And I still am having to focus and be like, okay, I need to build in time for me and my team to learn to use these tools. I might need to build in time for my team to actually redo the work because AI didn't do it good enough. I may need to build in time for my team to figure out why AI didn't do the work good enough. Is it because they didn't prompt it correctly? Okay, they need to learn how to prompt. I need to learn how to prompt. So I would actually suggest folks follow Christopher Penn on this. He is excellent at helping break down where those skills fall short, why you're not getting good results. I learned, again, the prompting thing is a perfect example. He has this analogy of if you walk into a library and you ask a librarian to recommend a book.
Yeah.
If they just throw down whatever happens to be next to them, the likelihood that that book is what you wanted, it's pretty slim. In contrast, if you come in and you say, hello, I like murder mysteries written by Agatha Christie. Can you please recommend another author similar to Agatha Christie that writes murder mystery books that take approximately this much time to read? You're going to get a much better result from that query. So even stuff like that from a practical standpoint, this is why I go back to, okay, why didn't the AI do well? Did I not do something effectively? So yes, so far using it for very practical, tactical things like, editing, idea generation, headlines. Again, like I wrote these 5 headlines, give me 10 more. Oh, I see you've now asked a question, turn it into declarations, right? Atlassian has some excellent tools to help with page summaries, support ticket summaries, for example, changing the tone a little bit to say like, oh, this maybe doesn't sound as helpful. Make it more helpful, or, oh, this doesn't sound as empathetic, change the tone, right? So I have seen some great results from that, but I would not characterize it yet as what's done wonders for your work. I'm like, well, let's caveat a little bit, but I think that there is a lot of practice.
I think I'm on the same page with you. My experience has been very similar. And I'm, like you, very curious to see what this conversation is going to play out like the next time we talk, maybe in 12 months, and we maybe have found that wonderful use case, right? Like that would be pretty epic for like society in large. So Ashley, this was amazing. Thank you so much. And maybe we'll do this again in a few months and we'll talk about, what else is happening in AI in
yeah.
So thanks again.
Well, if you find the silver bullet, definitely let me know.
All right. There you go. That was Ashley Faus, who leads Lifecycle Marketing at Atlassian. Tune in again next week for another episode with another great marketing scientist.